the cost of education is a concern.
Absolutely.
Even though on the one hand, a lot of Indian parents send their kids abroad, but at the same time, there's a large segment who would like to send them to private universities.
I will give you the actual numbers. It's crazy. If you have to study in Delhi University, you will effectively spend approximately 5,000 rupees for an undergraduate degree per year. If you are studying at Jindal, our average tuition cost is approximately 3 to 3.5 lakhs. If you are going to study in a UK institution, it is approximately 30 to 40 lakhs. If you are going to study in a US institution, it is approximately 70 to 80 lakhs.
Right.
Per annum I'm talking about. You hit it on the nail. The middle class of India, who simply cannot spend 30, 40 lakhs, who would ideally prefer to spend that 5,000, how do we help them?
The new educational policy of 2020, there seems to be a lot of talk about innovation, research, both at the primary level as well as the higher education level. How do you address that?
Frankly, I have been a strong votary of what the national education policy has done. It's one such policy which was thoughtful, comprehensive. Institutions have been empowered as well.
Right.
At a practical level, it's going to take time to implement it. But at a philosophical and at a theoretical and at a policy level, it's been absolutely amazing.
So I was talking to one of the teachers and I said, why have you inflated the grades to that extent? She said, we've actually halved it compared to what class 10th and 12th does.
Yeah.
So is that a concern for you?
We should be concerned about it. By putting grades as the only way of assessing student performance, we are also facing a huge mental health crisis among our young people.
How do you look at the growing number of students from India going abroad? Last year, I was looking at the numbers. Entire batches are going abroad.
Correct. No, it's a matter of huge concern. At one level, we don't have enough public universities to support the aspirations of young people. At second level, the good public universities are hugely oversubscribed. So if you are not a 99 point whatever, you are almost like the old 60.
Absolutely.
I was traveling around the world, looking at universities around the world. And let me tell you, Arjun, I was fascinated by what I was seeing in China. They realized the future is in relation to knowledge society.
Online classes are catching up in India. You are one of the leaders in that. How do you actually balance all that?
UNESCO had estimated now that almost 3 billion young people were simply removed out of education. We are all, in many ways, good in responding to a crisis. We have also been able to manage to create a community. So we have students from 105 countries pursuing online education.
Right.
And I'm happy to report that just a few months ago, that world's Times Higher Education rankings, which is a London-based organization, fasten your seatbelts, O.P. Jindal Global University has been ranked number 1 in the world for online education.
AI seems to be overwhelming the world now. How are you looking at it?
Let's imagine driverless cars, for example.
Right.
If driverless cars are going to be out there operated through AI, and if an accident happens, how are you going to determine liability? And this is just one example, but there are so many other examples. And also the issue of authorship. Who owns the intellectual property rights? What is the status of copyright law? So many such areas are out there unanswered. Most of the time, almost all government funding in relation to scholarships and other types of grants are not available for private universities. So we have been treated as a pariah in the larger scheme of higher education, and till such time we receive that status as an equal partner in the higher
And you're fighting for that. You're
fighting is we are making some noises.
Welcome to Arjun Bhagat Decodes or AB Decodes. Today we are talking about higher education in India. Now that's a topic which is slightly different from what I usually talk about, which is on geopolitics as well as internal politics of India. But global education, higher education is a key for India to become a developed nation. And today we have one of the leaders in the educational fields in India, Professor C. Raj Kumar, who is Vice-Chancellor of the O.P. Jindal Global Global University. Professor, if I look at your profile, it's amazing. I mean, you've done your LLB from, of course, Delhi, then you were a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford and LLM at Harvard, SJD in Hong Kong. It's an amazing profile. I think one of the best that I've ever seen. How did this journey actually begin? What about your schooling and what about your parents? We'd like to know a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much, Arjun. It's such a pleasure to be in your show. Um, so I'm originally from a place called Kanyakumari, which is the southernmost tip of India. It's a very special place because it's the conglomeration of Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and Indian Ocean. That's where I was born. I did my early schooling there. And then I went to Chennai for my high school and also my college. I did my undergraduation from Loyola College, Madras, after which I came to Delhi to do my law at the Campus Law Center, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. This is the time when it was my first trip essentially out of Tamil Nadu. I spent good part of my life in Tamil Nadu and I landed up in Delhi. And that was an extraordinary experience because University of Delhi is a microcosm of India. For the first time in my life, I met people from, all parts of India. And that was an extraordinary experience. Then I got the Rhodes Scholarship, as you mentioned, to go to Oxford. That was in the year 1998. And this was a time when I landed up in Oxford and I was hugely inspired by what I had experienced at Oxford. I began to think and ask a question to myself that are there universities like this in India? And I was in a college called University College and it was founded in the year 1249. And we were celebrating the 750th anniversary in 1999. And he would always start his speech by saying that we are the oldest college in the English-speaking world. And on one occasion, I asked him about it. And he reminded me about something that I knew, but it didn't. He reminded in a way that it struck me, which is he said that in your subcontinent there were institutions such as Nalanda,
Of course.
Takshashila, Vallabhi, Vikramshila, long before Oxford, which is only 800 years old, Bologna, which is 900 years old, and American universities, including Harvard, which is barely 400 years old. That was a very significant moment in my life when I began to think that why can't India have universities like Oxford? And there began a journey of discovery and inspiration.
So then, in 2009, Jindal University was established. Obviously, you probably met Naveen Jindal before that. How did that conversation start? Because, private universities in India are a recent phenomena. Of course, we had two or three, as you mentioned earlier, we did have them. But 1995 was when Sikkim Manipal University was founded. And of course, in the last 20 years, 10, 15 years, there's been, so many new universities have been created in India, private universities. I'd also like to know why the liberal arts came. Of course, I've been to a liberal arts university in the United States.
Right.
And so has a completely different character than the STEM ones.
Correct.
Right? Or the engineering ones that we know.
Yes. So, in fact, one of the things that was inspiring for me was precisely to look at that because India, for all its educational, evolution, we had very good institutions in STEM, including the great IITs, but also the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and other such institutions. But so, one of the things that I was inspired by the US was the fact that private universities had a very strong reputation and they were also created through philanthropic, not-for-profit endeavors. People may not know this, but Harvard, Yale, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, they're all private universities.
Yes.
And continuously evolving through philanthropic contributions.
Most of them are trusts or
Absolutely.
corporations.
That's exactly right. And so, and then to cut the story short, I graduated from Harvard and then began working as a lawyer in New York. I had this obsession to be part of an effort to build the university took over me so strongly that I quit the firm and joined NYU as a visiting fellow. I was hugely inspired by what I saw at NYU. And then I got a teaching fellowship to go to Japan. I taught in Tokyo. I was fascinated by what I saw among the Japanese universities. Some of them are truly world-class, especially in the field of STEM. And that's when I got a job in Hong Kong. I moved to Hong Kong in the year 2002. 2002 to 2008, I was in Hong Kong and doing my teaching and research in law. But then I was completely immersed in a world of, let's say, discovery and passion to build a university in India. I was traveling around the world looking at universities around the world, including in Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Taipei, Australia, North America, Western Europe.
My
And
God,
also,
that was quite a.
because I was an academic, so
Right.
we get to travel for conferences, but this was my obsession. But I was also looking at China. And let me tell you, Arjun, I was fascinated by what I was seeing in China. They were reimagining their universities. As you know, China lost almost 3 decades in the Cultural Revolution. And so they were completely reimagining and transforming their universities.
Well, what you're saying is that the Chinese decided to reimagine. That's the word you use, reimagine.
Absolutely.
Which I often feel we need to reimagine. India needs to reimagine its universities and educational ecosystem.
Undoubtedly. And the reason they did was very, very clear about it, which is that they realized the future is in relation to knowledge society. They were conscious of what is going to happen in almost all fields, but they were conscious of what is going to happen in the fields of innovations in science and technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, and the entire gamut of education.
And this was in the early
It
2000s.
was early 2000s, and they were just transforming it. And it was happening so fast that I could see the way universities were being reimagined. In fact, so much so that they were upgrading their universities, they were opening up their universities, they were internationalizing the universities, and they were beginning to learn from pretty much anybody from anywhere in the world. I was just completely blown away. And I'll be candid with you. This was when I was teaching in Hong Kong. I would come to India because my obsession to do something in India was at its peak. And I was disappointed. The more I came to India, I was disappointed because we were mindlessly expanding our education sector with little regard to quality, let alone excellence. We were building more and more public universities without enough support system for resources, infrastructure, including faculty. We were expanding our private universities in a pace where we simply did not bother about quality. The privatization of Indian higher education, which led to what we have today, has resulted in a large number of universities, honestly, a good number of them mediocre, for-profit, and even dubious endeavors in the field of higher education. It was in that milieu I wrote a paper entitled Establishing India's First Global University and got to meet with Mr. Jindal in precisely on 31st October 2006. I met him on the sidelines of a conference and was introduced to him by the then Law Minister, H.R. Bharadwaj, who inaugurated the conference. I had not known Mr. Bharadwaj before, but I met him and shared the idea with him. He, who knew his father, Mr. O.P. Jindal, and this was also a time when Shri O.P. Jindal had died in a plane crash in 2005.
Right.
And I met Mr. Naveen Jindal in 2006. And, sometimes these are all very destinical. Independently, they as a family and Naveen Jindal in particular was thinking about what they should probably do as a tribute to the father. Here I am coming from Hong Kong and giving this idea of building India's first global university and as a tribute to his father. And that meeting on 31st October 2006 started a journey, but took a year. I've had several meetings with him and essentially persuading him to be the John Harvard of India, to be the LIUEL of India, to do what James Stanford and Leland Stanford did to build the Stanford University, to do what Ranjan Shah and Li Ka-shing were doing in Singapore, Hong Kong, as well as in mainland China. In some ways, the idea of philanthropy that essentially created some of the best institutions in the United States, we were trying to do it. But mind it, in India, we don't have a very strong culture of philanthropy in the field of education and health. We do have a few, and there are notable ones, including the great Tata institutions by J.R.D. Tata. In contemporary times, I would say one of the amazing examples is the extraordinary contribution of Sri Madan Mohan Malviya in establishing the Banaras Hindu University.
Yes.
But a bit of sadness that by and large, the education sector in India, higher education in particular,
So let's talk about that.
had a lot of mediocrity in it.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about that because the way, once India got independence, there was a huge gap between people who had access to education and the state took it upon itself to, make sure that it would decimate higher education, or it would. So, in some ways, do you think that has stifled that entire ecosystem?
I wouldn't say that. I'll tell you why. Because the state at that time, clearly they had fantastic vision. If I were to identify one, I won't call it entirely a mistake, but maybe a tactful error could be that we divested our great research institutions from universities. So, for example, the Indian Space Research Organization, for example, ISRO, or even CSIR, these institutions, one of the remarkable things about the leading universities in the US, UK, or even Japan is that research is embedded in university systems.
Right.
There is constant evolution.
That spawns the entire ecosystem of innovation.
Exactly. So our a good number of our universities did have that research ecosystem, but somehow we divested a lot of our research, especially in STEM areas, to research only institutions, and our universities, many of them ended up becoming teaching only institutions, and over a period of time we ended up doing not well on both as well. But I would still argue that at that time, especially soon after the independence, we had established some of the most amazing institutions. We just stopped doing that. If you look at today, we take a lot of pride in IITs and IIMs and even Indian Institute of Science Bangalore. These are all established just after a few years of independence. Frankly, if you look at the last, say, 75 years or even 60 years post independence, we have not been able to create, we've just multiplied them, but we have somehow not been able to, what I mentioned, reimagine the higher education architecture with the view to promoting quality and excellence, let alone research and development, which will ultimately fuel innovation and social and economic transformation.
So, if we look at the new educational policy of 2020, there seems to be a lot of talk about innovation, research, both at the primary level as well as the higher education level. But at the same time, you have repeatedly talked about the quality of education. So when you're talking about quality of education, you're talking about the quality of the educators. After all, they are the ones who are going to then go out and teach. How do you address that gap, and how do you do it at Jindal as well? Because now you have that first hand kind of, and nearly 15 years of teaching here. How do you then translate that template into larger areas across India?
The first thing that we began to do was to focus on hiring of faculty, because the foundation of a good university is not the infrastructure that we have. We, of course, have good infrastructure, but it is the outstanding individuals we have as faculty who can not only educate, inspire, empower, and even transform the mind of the students who will ultimately become part of the institution, but also will be at the vanguard of research and knowledge creation and publications that will create an atmosphere for new ideas. We did that. 2009 was our journey beginning. We started with one school in 2009 with just 100 students and 10 full-time faculty members and 20 admin staff. And 15 years later, last year we celebrated our 15th anniversary, and today we are a community of 14,000 plus students, 1,200 plus faculty members, and over 3,000 plus admin staff. Our students come from over 75 countries.
Amazing ratio, actually.
I know. So we maintain a less than a 1:10 faculty student ratio, which is very important for another reason, which is A, the students have more face time, faculty time. Second, is that the faculty have time to pursue research. We simply cannot build a research infrastructure without allowing our faculty the time to be grappling with ideas leading to publications. Now, you asked a question about NEP. Frankly, I have been a strong votary of what the National Education Policy has done. It's an absolutely transformative document, visionary document. It's one such policy which was thoughtful, comprehensive, practical, and has a time-bound, impactful,
And for those who don't understand how the policy actually works, it's also freed up the states. The states now have a lot of they are empowered to actually make decisions, and also have the flexibility of then giving more resources to them, permissions. Is that how it's working right now?
But one is that states having the freedom, but institutions have been empowered as well.
Right.
At a practical level, it's going to take time to implement it. But at a philosophical and at a theoretical and at a policy level, it's been absolutely amazing. In fact, I will say this, that the Ministry of Education, Government of India, has provided a salutary leadership in not only formulating and leading the national education policy, but also to be able to work closely with these stakeholders. So we've had hundreds of meetings as vice-chancellors of different institutions and things like that. The other thing what the NEP has done is that it has also addressed some of the big issues that are facing the higher education sector. One is, for example, research. I mean, how do you build a research ecosystem? It has provided for an opportunity to build a national research foundation which can ultimately fund research as well. Now, of course, it is also the case that the GDP investment in higher education has not yet fulfilled the vision of NEP, and that's a work in progress. But clearly,
And that we're looking at about 6%.
that's exactly right.
And right now we are at about 3,
Around less than 4%.
less than 4%.
So we still have a long way to go there. Secondly, it has for the first time recognized the importance of research and benchmarking and rankings and how we need to position ourselves in when it comes to research and publications that will enable us to become a world-class university. It has addressed the issue of internationalization. Hitherto, there was a lot of skepticism about whether we should pursue internationalization or not. NEP has once and for all settled that.
So when you say internationalization, you mean universities coming in from abroad and setting
That goes, but that's only one part of
also
international.
getting students here.
International collaborations,
Right.
for existing Indian universities to partner with institutions
Right.
to have exchange programs, dual degree programs, joint degree programs, study abroad programs, joint research opportunities.
Right.
These were all either not possible to be done, or there were confusion and lack of, let's say, a regulatory enabling environment.
So they've freed that up.
They free that up.
They've left it to the institutions to decide.
Absolutely. It's also the case that the vision of NEP ultimately is also to develop multiple type of programs so that students are able to have different exit and entry points. So, for example, this whole idea of academic bank of credits, which has been introduced by NEP, is also where it's possible for a student to pursue 3 years and get a degree. If he or she wants to do 4 years, can actually get an honors degree. If they want to do 2 years, they'll get a diploma, because in a country like India, there are lots of challenges for people to pursue, their study programs. There may be financial reasons or health-related reasons, and the fact that the earlier approach would not enable students who have, for whatever reasons, are able to end up discontinuing their education in that continuum, they still will be rewarded for what they are studying.
So that flexibility is coming in.
100%, and that's a very welcome trend. The other thing the NEP has done is it has given a good narrative and even signaling for private sector.
Well, then how do you do that? We've got about 22 years for Viksit Bharat, which is, 2047. And we have an educational infrastructure. We have private universities, coming up. Quality of those private universities, many of them is still a question mark. How do you actually create those capacities of really good education? How do you actually, then move to the next level?
Yeah.
And unless you have good higher education, we won't really be a developed nation, will we?
100%, and it's a very, very, very important issue about which we don't talk enough. I personally think that we should be paying far greater attention to higher education. You mentioned about the numbers. Let's put it out there. Today, India has, say, 1,200 plus universities, around 40,000 plus colleges. And believe it or not, 70% of them are in the private sector. 70% of them in the private sector. Student-wise, we have 70% of our students studying in private higher education institutions. This tectonic shift that has happened literally in the last 2 to 3 decades, essentially where both in terms of the dominance of private sector in higher education in terms of institutions and the student numbers, means that we need to take the private higher education system far more seriously. Unfortunately, even today, at the regulatory level, there are huge challenges, obstacles, even limitations imposed upon private higher education institutions.
So give me an example of that so that one gets a sense of what problems you might be facing or the other private universities.
So we are somewhat privileged because we belong to a unique category of Indian institutions, which is again an extraordinary and visionary contribution of our Prime Minister. You may recall that almost 6 years ago, the Honorable Prime Minister announced a policy called Institution of Eminence policy.
Right.
The vision of the IOE, which, by the way, was done in China 25 years ago, Russia 20 years ago, Japan 10, 15 years ago. We are kind of late in that journey, but nevertheless, we did. The vision of IOE policy was that identify 10 public universities and 10 private universities, the top of them, and give them complete autonomy and freedom from all regulation. Give them 10, 15 years so that they can do what they want to do, and help them propel to become world-class universities, ultimately to be among the top 500 universities in the world, and then progressively to become even more. This was the vision of the policy. An elaborate framework was created, and I'm happy to let you know that in that process, 8 public universities were selected and 4 private universities were selected, and we were one among them.
Right.
Which
And
is
only liberal arts.
non-STEM university or non-medicine university, which is there. Now, the thing is that was a very important signaling. But I would argue that if you have recognized the fact that somehow lack of autonomy and more regulation has impacted the growth of universities, and you are giving that to these institutions, I think there is a case for doing more of that across the board. I strongly believe that universities are ultimately should be self-governed, self-regulated, because today more than ever before, students are not gullible to make their choices as to where they want to go and study. They do their research. They are familiar with what kind of outcomes in terms of learning they're going to get. They are even more conscious about the fact that what kind of job opportunities are available. I'll give you a funny story. When I went to college in India, and maybe even you went to college, my parents had hardly any kind of choice and contribution in the process of engaging with my faculty, let alone my vice-chancellor or professor or whatever. Today, when a young student is being admitted to our university, I am not exaggerating. It is not uncommon when I am entertaining in my office, 8 people from a family, grandfather, grandmother, of course the father and mother, maybe an uncle and a brother and a sister, with the boy or the girl they're going to admit. And they're sitting in front of me, and the grandfather's asking, what is your placement situation? Can you believe it?
I think that's what makes us Indians.
This is,
the whole family is out there.
So the point is that they are essentially, they have done their research.
Absolutely.
They have figured it out. You can't simply sell a product or a service which is not worth it. They have done their research. They have done their due diligence. So in some ways, what I'm trying to tell you is that no regulator can create greater accountability than the user of the service, which is the student himself or herself. So why impose more and more restrictions on their imagination, on their creativity, on their ability to innovate?
But in a way, that's how we're structured, aren't we? I mean, from a political point of view, from a bureaucratic point of view, we'll get a little bit of a freedom, and then there'll be a pushback.
But on this one, Arjun, I'm going to give a free pass to our politicians. I think they have a better vision here. Even several of our bureaucrats.
That because a lot of the politicians also own many of the universities.
No, you have a fair point, but I'll tell you why. I think if you look at the way some of the politics, not only NEP, I'll give you another example. One of the important things that the government has done is that their stronghold on board memberships of IIM, for example.
Right.
It is the government itself took a decision that we need to have more alumni in the board, the stronghold, the historical stronghold of government. Because what has happened in the past is that we started confusing ourselves with the fact that if we give money, we have to control decision making.
Right.
That's one point. It got worse. Even if we don't give money, which is private universities, we still have to control them because they may do something wrong.
Right.
In fact, this idea that somebody will do something wrong is the very foundation for all these regulations. And I am not at all suggesting that bad things don't happen.
Right.
But what I'm trying to tell you is that we have now got 75 years of experience that this type of regulation has not worked for us.
Yeah.
We need to reimagine our regulatory architecture.
I completely agree with you, but I think there is the government and the bureaucrats, they have a trust issue with its own citizens. But, that is hopefully now, going to gradually, become less and less as
So
we go forward.
they have demonstrated this precise, for example, in fact, Government of India came up with a very interesting policy on relation to what they call graded autonomy, where depending upon your NAC accreditation score,
Right.
you will have more autonomy. Now, that's very creative. So it's not like everybody gets that autonomy, but you have to earn your autonomy.
Right.
So if you are in whatever parameters you set up, if you are figuring out in that parameters, you are going to be given more autonomy on certain matters. And the others who have not yet attained, they have a pathway to work towards. To be fair to them, whether it is AICT or UGC, internally I'm sure they are also discussing about the fact that how do we give more and more autonomy to well-performing institutions while being cautious of the fact that gullible students should not become victims of, let's say, bad advertisements or unethical practices or illegal aspects of tuition fee and capitation fee and all those things that sometimes happen. How to protect both the student and the parent and even the educational ecosystem from those practices. So that is the reason why some of these regulations were put in place.
So another subject that I've always been curious about and concerned about as well is which I sometimes refer to as grade inflation. Right. So I was talking to one of the teachers and I said, why have you inflated the grades to that extent? So the teacher, said to me, she said, we've actually halved it compared to what class 10th and 12th does.
Yeah.
So is that a concern for you?
So, well, at the educational sector level, we should be concerned about it. But I think the problem should be handled at a different level, which is that even today, not us, but a lot of institutions place enormous emphasis on that one examination.
Right.
And so long as your admissions process is hugely dependent upon that one 12th standard or 10th standard board examination, we will continue to, do all those things to ensure that these students are out there because that will enable them to get into good colleges and good institutions. Now, if you look at the United States, for example, and many parts of the world, the qualifying examination in the form of 12th standard or 10th standard is something to be qualified. But beyond that, they use entrance examinations,
Right.
be it SAT or ACT or in specialized disciplines such as law, LSAT or
So you
LMAT.
look at a holistic picture of the kids,
Absolutely.
the activities, the internship.
And also the correlation between the aptitude of the students to pursue a particular program and the test that they are taking.
So how do you then deal with it? How does Jindal deal with it?
So we actually don't care about your 12th standard exams at all.
Right.
We see that as a qualifying examination. So you need to fulfill a minimal percentage of 12. Sometimes it is 60% or whatever. But all admission to our degree programs are based upon an independent entrance examination. It is JSAT for some disciplines. It's LNAT for some disciplines. It's in the masters. We take many entrance examinations. But basically, we take into account your performance in the entrance examination. And on many other disciplines, We also, like for example, business studies. Our business school feels that they should have an interview and have a conversation. Especially if you have to give scholarships and things like that. So a holistic assessment of a candidate is absolutely important to determine whether he or she is suitable to be admitted.
That's my point. I mean, how many kids get 99? And, so if a child gets 92, it's like you won't get admission into a DU university.
Not only that, Arjun, I think we should also talk about the elephant in the room, which is by putting grades as the only way of assessing student performance, we are also facing a huge mental health crisis among our young people.
Right.
A generation of our young students are traumatized by the entire experience of high school education, traumatized by the entire experience of preparing for entrance examinations, especially in STEM areas, and the trauma doesn't stop through. It's very difficult to discuss over an interview about the causes of the mental health challenges that young people face, but it is in no small measure caused by this, pressure exerted on them, both through the societal aspects, but also the kind of approach that we've adopted.
How do you look at the growing number of students from India going abroad? Again, I'm going to quote my example. When I was studying in DPS Arkipuram, there were 14 of us who went at the undergrad level, right? Last year, I was looking at the numbers, and I'm just talking about some of the top schools in Delhi, Vasant Valley, Sri Ram. Entire batches are going abroad.
Correct.
And of course, now Jindal, Ashoka, and some very good universities have actually created that space for a lot of those kids to actually come here. But India is spending billions of dollars abroad.
No,
So how do you look at that?
No, it's a matter of huge having for a number of reasons. Having spent a good part of my life abroad, I am a strong votary of international education, and I believe our students should go abroad. But I also feel that the first undergraduate education experience ought to be in the country.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm also mindful of the fact that we need to create an ecosystem for these students to pursue education in our country. When you look at the policy level impetus that can support and encourage good private universities in India, it's very minimal. It's like they exist and they are out there. Let's focus on IITs. Let's
Right.
focus on IIMs. Let's focus on central universities. But we are playing a very important role, and there should be more of us. And we should also be heard about our own challenges. Today, for example, one of the biggest challenges that we in private universities are facing is the whole challenge of GST, for example. The GST regime has effectively undermined private universities in more ways than what the policymakers would like to believe. And that requires consultation, discussions, because we are contributing to our nation building agenda. At one level, we don't have enough public universities to support the aspirations of young people. At second level, the good public universities are hugely oversubscribed. So if you are not a 99 point whatever, you are almost like the old 60.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So students having choices between the best of public institutions in the country, leave them and join us.
Right.
But we and Ashoka and a few more are far fewer in number.
Right.
We need lot more private universities. We need to give them more attention, more freedom, more flexibility, and more support, not on the financial side. We are fortunate. Our philanthropist, Mr. Naveen Jindal, is a visionary. He has put in 2,500 crores to set up this university and continue to put that money with zero expectation. We don't even have management quota. So he doesn't have any influence in what we do. He has ensured academic freedom, autonomy, and independence. But that's a rare phenomenon. That's not the larger imagination of private universities in India. Here you have a business leader who has made philanthropic contribution to build a world-class university and keeps himself out of its governance is a very rare phenomenon. But we need to celebrate that phenomenon. We need to replicate that phenomenon. We need to provide more support to such institutions.
So you talked about philanthropy. You talked about Naveen Jindal putting in a large amount of 2,505 and keeps reinvesting it. For other universities, private universities, the cost of education is a concern.
Absolutely.
Even though on the one hand, a lot of Indian parents send their kids abroad, but at the same time, there's a large segment who would like to send them to private universities, and yet they have. So, how do you balance that?
So, Arjun, I will give you the actual numbers. It's crazy. If you have to study in Delhi University, you will effectively spend approximately 5,000 rupees for an undergraduate degree per year. Approximately 5,000 is the cost of education.
Yeah.
Most of them it's lesser. If you are studying at Jindal, our average tuition cost is approximately 3 to 3.5 lakhs.
Right.
If you are going to study in a UK institution, it is approximately 30 to 40 lakhs. If you are going to study in a US institution, it is approximately 70 to 80 lakhs.
Right.
Per annum, I'm talking about. You look at the difference here, 5,000, 3 to 4 lakhs, 30 to 40 lakhs,
And
and 70 to 80 lakhs. This is our scenario. You hit it on the nail. The middle class. The middle class of India, who simply cannot spend 30, 40 lakhs, who would ideally prefer to spend that 5,000, but there are not institutions enough, for whom the 3 to 4 lakhs that we charge is also expensive, low middle class in particular, large number. How do we help them? We need to help them by helping these private universities.
Right.
We need to provide support. Most of the time, almost all government funding in relation to scholarships and other types of grants are not available for private universities. So, we have been treated as a pariah in the larger scheme of higher education until such time we receive that status as an equal partner in the higher.
You're fighting for that. You're a.
We are making some noises. But I know that the government knows it.
Right.
I know that there is a sea change in the attitude. The politicians in particular have a much better attitude. Forget stopping the millionaires' children to go abroad. Listen, they are not going to stop.
No, they're not.
Make their choices to do that. We don't need to work towards stopping the people going abroad. That number is much smaller in the larger scheme of things. But what we should be doing is that a large number of young people in India are receiving mediocre education. And we should be concerned about that because they will become unemployed and unemployable and will not only pose a huge risk for the demographic aspirations of the country, but also potentially a societal risk when it comes to deviant behavior, because ultimately, if you have a large number of young people, qualified people, educated people who don't have jobs, what else they will do?
Right. You run one of India's top educational institutions. How do you deal with the stresses that students go through? I mean, we had an unfortunate case recently in one of the universities. So there are emotional stresses that kids have, relationship issues, academic pressures. How do you deal with it here?
I think anybody and everybody who looks at this issue should be humble enough to accept that these are challenges faced by every institution.
Right.
I mean, sometimes we tend to forget that the larger number of such instances and incidents have happened in our leading institutions.
Right.
If you look at, for example, IITs,
Of course.
the data is, staggeringly concerning. Second, we need to recognize that there is not one single cause for these things. There are a lot of triggers and lot of reasons that contribute to the sort of stress ecosystem that prevails in our education
Yeah,
institution.
that's what I said.
And not necessarily created in the university itself.
Right. So
It
relationships
could be
is
predated too.
Right.
No, not only relationship, it could be predated as well.
right.
Because young people who come into universities have already made up a lot in their own mind
Right.
in their early high school years, at least from 8th grade to 12th grade, shapes a lot of what is going to happen in their future as well.
Right.
And I also feel very strongly that peer group also plays a very big role.
Right.
It's not like all the teachers and administrators are the only people who are responsible for it. I think sometimes individual acts of bullying or ragging or other incidents that might happen in a college or an institution can have the potential to have a scar in the mind of this person,
Right.
who in turn can form a trigger. Let me quickly spend a little bit time about what we do and what we can do. First of all, we should be open enough to have conversations surrounding it. We should create an ecosystem where students who are facing such challenges can have opportunities to engage with counselors. We, and I believe every institution should have a fantastic and a very vibrant wellness health center. We also have what is known as Sukoon, which is an independent organization that we've established on campus for the students to have mental health services. We also have an online platform in the form of Your Those, so that if those students who don't want to have physical interaction, they can have access to online and virtual interaction. We also should have early warning signals that happens in the classroom, where the teacher himself or herself notices some aspect of the behavior of a student. Then there are sort of trigger warnings initiated. But all I can say is that this is a continuing effort that all of us have to put. And also, Arjun, there are varying degrees of sensitivity as well. We are also ultimately not dealing with machines. We're dealing with human beings. So a simple act of, let's say, a defeat or a failure or a lack of selection and inclusion in a club can be taken by one student in his or her stride, and for another student
Be a trigger.
it will be a trigger warning, going into depression,
Right.
mental health challenge, and possibly challenging self-worth.
Right.
So we first should understand it's an extremely complex area where universities, not just in India, around the world, are facing these challenges. There is no one right answer. All of us have to constantly work towards making a better environment for our young people.
So we talked about developing India and bridging that entire educational divide, and online classes are catching up in India. You are one of the leaders in that. How do you actually then met out that quality of education? How do you actually test the students to make sure they are getting the right degrees or they are getting the right marks? How do you actually balance all that?
Yeah, well, I must say that we are all, in many ways, good in responding to a crisis. Just think about the early months of 2020. The whole world suddenly stopped. We were all facing the COVID-19 crisis. But because our university had already invested a lot in technology, within 24 hours, we could transition into completely online education, where our students, faculty were all able to receive high quality education. But I must say with all humility that that's not the largest story. UNESCO had estimated now that almost 3 billion young people were simply removed out of education. Even in a country like India, a lot of our young people, including in schools, colleges, universities, were simply deprived of the opportunity. So as a privileged institution,
Because people didn't have the computers,
we needed three things
yeah,
to do
internet.
well. We need good quality equipment, Wi-Fi, as well as the bandwidth to be able to do it, and many people didn't have it. While that became the starting point of our foray into online in a big way in universities, but what ended up happening also was we began to start using that as an opportunity to think maybe we can deliver high quality education in this platform and improve the delivery experiences. So if you look at the history, we had the older version, which is called a distance education, highly pejorative. Mass education still was providing some services for those who want to get those credentials. But this new reimagination of online education led to a complete transformation of the ecosystem. And guess what? We, a relatively small university and a young university, we're barely 15 years old, we have collaborated with one of the world's leading edtech company called Coursera, and we also collaborate with an Indian edtech company called Upgrad. And together, we have over 6,000 students who have been pursuing blended and online and hybrid education with different disciplines and different degree programs that you offer. Our experience doing this now for 5 years is that quality and excellence will not and should not be compromised. So what do? First, we put the same faculty who teach physically in classes who will also teach online. That means the same qualifications, the same experience, the pedagogical grounding that they have, they bring that into the online experience. Second, we recognize that as a university, we don't have the technological bandwidth, and hence we partner with these platforms who bring with that technological bandwidth so that high quality online education can be offered. Third, we recognize that online education in several disciplines can also have a sort of a physical component in the form of live classroom experiences. Not all of it need to be asynchronous. Part of it can be physical. Part of it can be hybrid.
Just like a hybrid model.
Absolutely. Fourth, the examination, grading, assessment, one of the most difficult challenges of it. Here, we have also innovated through online proctoring system so that the integrity of the examination, the integrity of the grading and assessment is also protected so that the credentials that they receive is actually valid. And the last bit is that we have also been able to manage to create a community. So we have students from 105 countries pursuing online education.
Right.
That scale and that depth and that influence, I believe, if done well, can provide a very important solution to the larger problem that we're facing in India, which is about access to education for a number of reasons. Not all people in the country can actually go and spend all their time physically in a campus, sometimes traveling to other cities and states of that. And I'm happy to report that just a few months ago, that World's Times Higher Education Rankings, which is a London-based organization, they, in their online education rankings, and fasten your seatbelts, we have been ranked number 1 in the world.
Oh, wow.
Not just in India.
Well, congratulations.
O.P. Jindal Global University has been ranked number 1 in the world for online education by Times Higher Education London. In a way, it's an example of how in that area, India can provide leadership. So when I met the Honorable Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhanji with this, he was asking me twice, in India or the world? And but the point is that if we do quality work, if we don't compromise on standards, we can jump above our weight, and that's what has happened in this.
In terms of artificial intelligence, everyone is talking about it, and education has these trends. A couple of years back in the US, it was the MBA after an engineering or an intensive course like that. AI seems to be overwhelming the world now. Even students in the liberal arts are wondering, should we do AI? How are you looking at it? You don't have STEM subjects. Is that an area that you will get into as well?
So first things first, we, in our 10-year strategic plan, which we outlined a couple of years ago, we are looking at moving into what we call the Jindal International Science and Technology Academy, where we intend to establish 10 new schools, which includes a School of Engineering and Technology, School of AI and Robotics, School of Data Sciences, School of Biotechnology and Biomolecular Sciences, and a School of Natural Sciences, followed by Medicine and other such areas. So we do have plans for it. But be that as it may, while a lot is being talked about AI, what we have already done is that we are looking at AI from the standpoint of its impact and its interface in law, liberal arts, humanities, social sciences, and business. We have started the MBA in data analytics. We have an MSc in AI and data science. We have just launched a BA in artificial intelligence and law. We have launched an LLM in AI and law, because one of the big challenges that we're going to face to AI, as we have already seen, is that what are the big challenges and consequences for regulation, for ethics, for compliance, and for issues surrounding privacy, and to what extent issues relating to liability is going to be dealt with. Let's imagine driverless cars, for example.
Right.
If driverless cars are going to be out there operated through AI, and if an accident happens, how are you going to determine liability? Is it going to be the person who was sitting behind and didn't do enough, or somebody who's actually operating the machine, or the manufacturer of the machine, or all of them together? And this is just one example, but there are so many other examples. And also the issue of authorship, who holds the intellectual property.
Right.
Today, for example, I mean, if you in ChatGPT itself, you want to create architectural design, you can create so many designs and you can make
Right.
things happen there. Who owns the intellectual property rights? What is the status of copyright law? So many such areas are out there unanswered. And so we are also conscious of the fact that it is the engineering and the technology side of AI is one thing, which we will also go into, but there is a whole range of issues.
It's very
that
interesting the
interface-
way you kind of, mixing it in with normal subjects.
Yes.
And then trying to see how that works.
Absolutely, yeah. And those questions are not only unanswered, but one can have different answers as well. So we have to figure out, how we lead that effort, because many a time the global south, for example, are ultimately forced to accept these decisions which have been already taken elsewhere. So we want to also play not only a leadership role, but an influential role, when I say we India, in these discussions that are happening, because the innovations that are happening in that field is happening in the West, and they may end up also creating policies surrounding it. We have to ask a question: are those policies in our best interests?
And Jindal University, O.P. Jindal University is one of the leaders in your law department, right? It's been dubbed as one of the top private universities. What other innovations are you bringing in? You're celebrating 75 years of India's constitution. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you, Arjun, for that question. Last year, literally in the month of June, it occurred to me that we will be celebrating, of course, our 15th anniversary, which is as a university. But more importantly, India will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Constitution. Literally on 26th November 1949, we adopted the Constitution, and 26th November 2024, it would be 75 years. And so I asked the question, do we have a Constitution Museum? And to my surprise, neither the Parliament nor the Rashtrapati Bhavan nor the Supreme Court has anything like that. And so we embarked on an extraordinary journey, and in less than 6 months, we built India's first Constitution Museum on our campus. I hope you will visit the museum.
So I'm going to go there right after this interview. I really want to see it.
The museum has come out very well. We had 5 objectives. One was to build the Constitution Museum with a view to provide access to information about the Constitution that goes beyond what is interesting for a lawyer or a judge. Second was to be able to recognize the fact that the constitutional ideals and principles are not just to be idealized, but how it should connect to ordinary individuals. The third was to pay tribute to the framers of the Constitution. In fact, if you see the museum, there's one entire floor as called the Makers Gallery. And for the first time in the history of India, we have paid tribute to the 300 members of the Constituent Assembly,
Right.
their lives, their contributions, their experiences. Fourth is that we have been able to in one of the aspects of the museum, we have traced the history of the last 75 years of the rights and freedoms evolution, literally from the Constitution, but all these 75 years, various laws, various rules, regulations, acts, important political milestones, and things. Like, for example, I'll just give one, and which is my favorite. We decided in India to provide the right to vote,
Right.
universal adult franchise. Just mind it that in Switzerland, till the 1950s, women were not allowed to vote.
Right.
But
And
Indian
they had universal
Constitution
suffrage.
Had universal adult suffrage. When the West was very skeptical of the fact that how could illiterate, uneducated Indians be given the right to vote, they're going to mess it up.
Right.
Such was the farsightedness of the people who framed the Constitution. We have documented that.
Right.
We have got lots of archives, and so the entire movie. So we have also had a lot of digital platforms. You'll see when you go to the museum, it's both a physical place and a digital space. So when we hosted the Honorable Speaker of the Lok Sabha, Shri Om Birla ji, and our Law Minister, Shri Arjun Bhagat ji, along with 8 Supreme Court judges and our own Chancellor, Mr. Jindal, they were all blown away. And I'll never forget Om Birla ji's words when he said, "Ye hum log kyun nahi socha iske baare mein?" So the idea was that to create something that will outlast our time, that will be an opportunity for the country and its people. We have made the museum for public. We don't have any charges, unlike museums, even the museums that the government has created, where there is actually a charge. We don't plan to charge anybody. So you can register and actually come and see the museum. We want to contribute to the civic discourse. We want to ensure that everybody has a stake in the constitution. And as it is nowadays, politicians are more concerned about the constitution. So we want to build that consciousness about the constitution across civil society.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kumar. Thank you so much for this wonderful interview. I think, we've covered so much of ground. I mean, I can probably talk to you for the next 1 hour, but great. It's and to see your university, it's been quite a revelation for me. I hadn't visited your campus.
Thank you.
Thank you so
It's such a
much.
pleasure.
Thank you. Thank
Talking.
you. Oh, there you go. The mics are on the way. Thanks for watching AB Decodes, Arjun Bhagat Decodes. Do watch me again and do subscribe to the channel.